So to continue off my last discussion in the last video, here's the thing. I talked about how Susan Collins had a history of being a retail politician. She went to all the events. She knew the names of all her constituents. She did all these things. But the reason why she was so strong at that time is because politics were different back then. People were ticket splitting back in the day. But it's also the fact that these politicians appear like they're in touch with their constituency. Okay. And probably in the old days, she was very much in touch with the constituency of her state. Because in a lot of ways, Maine has an independent streak, even though it's a blue state. Like I said, it's a blue state, but it also has an independent streak. And Maine had an interesting history because as little as 15 to 14 years ago, they used to have 2 Republican senators, even though it was a blue state. There was another Republican who served in office named Olympia Snowe, who was actually more moderate than Susan Collins. She was very much a liberal Republican, because back in the day that did exist. It doesn't exist anymore. She was the extinct rare form of a Republican. Like, she was literally almost a Democrat, but as a Republican. And it's not a thing anymore. But she was a very liberal Republican. And she voted for some Democratic causes, even when she was a senator. Her party effectively ostracized her for it. So eventually, in protest, she resigned and didn't run for re-election. So this lady named Olympia Snowe did not run for re-election. She resigned. She was also very popular in the state of Maine. But then an independent named Angus King, who also had family ties, ran for the Senate as an independent, and he got elected to replace her. And he caucuses with the Democrats, but he's still an independent, like Bernie Sanders, but caucuses with the Democratic Party. But this is the kind of history Maine has. It's the one state you can run as an independent and get elected. It is possible. Because then, again, it's an independent state. It's a very independent streak. But I argue that's how Susan Collins survived her political career. She ran as a very independent-ish kind of senator, like Olympia Snowe, and kind of like an Angus King. And she had a very moderate voting record. And she convinced the voters of her state she was in touch with the state's values. And she one time did show up. She went to people's events. She did the retail politicking. That's how incumbents like that hold onto power so long. And sometimes the people that run against them don't know what kind of forces they're running against. They think, oh, well, I could flip this seat because the state leans a certain political leaning direction and it's a good year for that party. Yes and no, because it really depends on the situation, who you're running against, how popular that person is, how well that person connects with their constituency. And she was a gifted retail politician once upon a time. So that's how she held onto her seat for so long. But like I said, the times in politics have changed. And apparently she don't even go out and see her constituency anymore. She votes 90+% of the time with Trump. Okay, which is going to become a very strong liability for her. And she's sitting there going on TV talking to people like they're too stupid to see that. Like, my vote for that court would have made no difference about Roe v. Wade and all these other consequential issues. Actually, it did make a difference, and it does make a difference. So her political choices did greatly and negatively impact her state of Maine. And it's even more dire now than it's been in the past because of who's running the government right now. He's destroying the government. And she's given him the green light to do it. The state of Maine, the voters of Maine see that now. The buck's up. They see through the nonsense. They know. They know she's not standing with them. And that's why I said she met her match this November with Troy Jackson, because he also has won competitive seats in elections. He's also won a state, a district in the state of Maine that was very conservative as a Democrat who's endorsed by DSA. So that's pretty significant. I mean, and I got news for people. The DSA thing is not as toxic anymore as it used to be. DSA labeling democratic socialist progressivism, the branding is not as toxic as it used to be. Okay? And in a time that people are so angry about the economy, and so angry about the cost of living, and so angry about the corruption in our government, it may actually be a strength. You know, because people are so mad about the status quo right now, they'll vote for anything they think is going to make their life better. And she's now walked herself into a trap that she's working into a political, polarizing environment. She's effectively completely stopped talking to her constituency, as went in hiding, lied about votes she's taken, talking to voters like they're stupid, as she's raising millions of dollars hand and fist trying to deceive people, but not come out and talk among the people anymore. She's become the culture of DC like everybody else. That's the difference. And that is what a lot of people are tired of. And it's beyond just partisan politics. Partisan politics is a big part of it. But it's also the culture is shifting too. And I want to remind people, the voters that voted for her in the past are not going to be the same voters that voted in 2026. Because like I said, more Democrats and left-leaning independents are going to vote in larger numbers than conservatives this election cycle. A larger number than conservative-leaning independents. It's going to mostly be Democrats and left-leaning independents voting. Okay. And they're looking for a populist energy. She does not represent that anymore. She does not represent the will of Maine voters anymore, and the voters now see that. And there are past voters who actually challenged her that used to vote for her. Okay. So, again, culture has shifted a lot. But it's also the fact that there's a younger generation of people voting too. A lot of these people voting did not vote in past elections. They're going to be voting this year. So the same voters that were in 2020 are not going to be the same voters that were there that are going to be there in 2026. Or the same voters in 2014 are not going to be the same voters in 2026. That's the point I'm making here. So the voting trends change too over time, you know. And I would argue, even though Maine is an independent leaning state, if you look at the years of the voting history of Maine, it has leaned more left over the last several decades, even though elections have been competitive. Because Susan Collins' margins have gotten closer and closer every election cycle. And her approval ratings only sunk since then. And Trump has never once won the state. The closest he came to winning it was 2016 against Hillary Clinton. And it was only by a couple points he lost by, to be fair. But since then, they voted for Democratic governors, Democratic legislators, mostly Democratic Congress people. Now an independent senator independent senators caucus with Democrats, which used to be a Republican in that seat. So it's only a matter of time before Susan Collins' seat flips. And they pressured her to stay and run for re-election because they knew that if she resigned and they had to find a replacement, that a Republican would certainly not win Maine if Susan Collins was not the one on the ballot. You know, because she is a political juggernaut, believe it or not. I don't know how, but she is. I mean, well, I do kind of know how. She played politicking very well in the past, but I don't think it's the same anymore. It's different now. That's all I want to say in this video discussing Maine. Anyways, y'all, you have a great night. You have a great day. Love you all. Goodbye.